Ladies and gentlemen, my name's Paul, and in this Game Today video, we're going to be discussing and analysing tech news which, as usual, has popped up over the past 24 or so hours. We're going to start things out with AMD and the 7nm GPUs from the company. 7nm has been one of those things that the company have been pursuing for some time now. Zen 2, of course, is also set to release next year. But in the Q3 earnings call of 2018, just a day or so ago, Lisa Su confirmed that we will be seeing the world's first 7nm data center GPU released by the company. This is almost certainly going to, of course, be the Vega 20 or Vega 7nm GPU. The company have confirmed it will have new deep learning operations, hardware virtualization, and, quote, a new high-speed interconnect. And according to the company, they have already secured multiple buyers for this card in the data center, which is obviously a really good thing. It shows that the company have already managed to drum up interest. If you cast your minds back to Computex, we did see AMD release a few snippets of information upon this GPU. The first one being that we see a 1.35 times boost in performance, a 2 times increase in transistor density, along with power efficiency. Of course, the 35% boost in performance is still relatively unknown in terms of how that's going to affect, let's say, AI calculations. Does that mean AI included? Does that mean standard rasterization performance, and so on? But it's fascinating, particularly as right now Nvidia have quite the stranglehold in that particular market when it comes to HPC and deep learning. From the verbiage, they have also specifically stated data centers and have not included gaming. It's possible they could be holding back that news, but given it's an investor conference, I'm going to suspect that that is not the case. So it pretty much for me confirms that the benchmarks we saw yesterday, you can click the video linked in the description of this video if you want more information on that, where Amy covered the benchmarks, were indeed for the professional level card and they were not for gaming at all. So once again, it does tell us that for 7nm, we are most likely going to have to wait for Navi, which is, at least according to the current schedule, going to appear probably around the midpoint of next year. And now from one AMD graphics card to another, and the RX 590. From a rumor of a possible grain of truth in it to a almost confirmation yesterday where Power Color leaked the existence of the card, and now we actually have a benchmark of the RX 590 appear, well actually several benchmarks in the Final Fantasy 15 database. And it reveals that this card does indeed put Nvidia at an uncomfortable position with the currently released GTX 1060 with traditional GDDR5 memory. In a nutshell, this card completely outpaces the GTX 1060. So the RX 590 is a much bigger leap over its predecessors than what the 580 managed over the 480 here. So what about the numbers then? The 590 looks to be about 20% on average faster than the 480. To put that into some point of comparison, the 580 was around 10% faster than what the 480 was. So with 1440p at high, we see the RX 480 scores 3091. Compare that to the 590, which scores 3570, or the RX 580, which scores just 3159. If we switch to 4K, the 590 scores 2122 points, the 580 scores 1861 points, and the 480 scores 1711 points. And once again, you can see all of the graphs on screen yourself. Of course, there are a couple of things we do need to take into consideration. Final Fantasy 15's benchmark is a little weird at times when it comes to certain graphics card architectures, and we also do not know the state of the silicon that we see listed here. It's possible it's final revision silicon. It's also possible it's 50 or 60 megahertz or what have you, lower than what the final production cards will be in terms of clock speed. And it's also possible that there might be driver inconsistencies, although because it is essentially the same card, I highly doubt the drivers are going to be an issue. So most likely we're looking at performance which is pretty darn on par with what you would expect to see in the final GPUs, give or take a percent or two. And of course, AIBs will have full reign, no doubt, to release cherry-pick samples of the cards with better cooling, which will boost higher and so on, which will, of course, increase the performance a little bit better compared to the standard vanilla reference design. My takeaway here is that these cards really comes down to the pricing. If AMD can launch these GPUs at the same price point as, let's say, the 580s are at right now, then it would make the 580 pretty much obsolete, and maybe AMD will release lower the prices for that until possibly the model's phased out. But the 590 will certainly gobble up a lot of sales. As for the GTX 1060, it's a real shame that Nvidia did not launch the card as a GTX 1060 Ti. After all, it is using the GP104 core with a couple of additional CUDA cores, and once again the GDDR5X memory. It would have probably been just enough to pip the RX 590 to the post. But until we see these two cards face off against one another, it's very difficult to know how the chips will fall, or how the GPUs will fall, I suppose is a better way of putting it. There is also another and somewhat ironic bit of competition from AMD themselves, and that is the used market when it comes to these particular cards. eBay right now is rife with deals of the RX 480. And if you were to look at the 480 versus the 580 in terms of specifications, the real difference between the two is, well, around 80 megahertz on the core. Memory speeds are identical, unless you're looking at the 4 gigabyte models of this particular card, for example, in which case it does have 7 Gbps memory. So it's one of those things where, because there are so many different used cards on the market, because obviously miners now are selling up their cards, one possible route, if you are on like a budget and you just want to buy a GPU to possibly tide you over to, let's say, Navi, or until the RTX cards come down in price or what have you, then one possible route might be to buy on eBay a cheap card. Whether or not you want to buy a used card for mining, this is just a very quick piece of advice to you. Generally speaking, mining cards will be okay, but I would highly advise you to check the warranty, and this does also depend upon the region. Some vendors will only honor the warranty if you were the original person who purchased the card, and then others it's literally tied to the actual card itself, from my understanding. So do a bit of due diligence, and obviously when you get the card, do make sure that you run the normal thing. So perhaps run like a loop on like Heaven or something like that, just to make sure that the card's okay and you don't have any memory artifacts, and play around a little bit as well with the memory clocks. Maybe just increase them a few percent, because if you notice it kind of starts going a bit weird, if you just increase the memory a little bit, it does tell you that the card's probably closer to the end of its life. But generally speaking, you'll probably be okay with a used card. But of course, your mileage will vary depending on Silicon Lottery, what the person was doing with it, whether they were mining. It's possible they just were a gamer, and maybe they sold their card and possibly upgraded to, let's say, an RTX 2080 or something, or maybe even a GTX 1080, since the cards have come somewhat down in price right now. And let's move over to another leak, this one being Intel and the 9980XE processor. As the name implies, it is essentially the successor to the 7980XE, and I use the word essentially because it's a slight refresh. We still have 18 cores, 36 threads, but the clock speeds have been slightly tweaked compared to their predecessors. Also, and this is something that's pretty important to you most likely, we do not have hardware fixes for Spectre and Meltdown. Yes, the 9900K does have these, but when it comes to the X299 refresh, they are not to be found, which is a bit of a shame. What we do have, though, are higher clock speeds. So we see 4.2 GHz for the 7980XE, go up to 4.5 GHz, and this is reflected in the benchmarks. A time spy result has managed to appear online, and what we have with the Core i9-9980XE is 10,728 points with 3D Mark time spy. The clock speeds being listed for this particular benchmark do show 3 GHz for the base clocks, 4,517 MHz for the boost clock. The price point for this particular processor is going to be just shy of $2,000 US, so it is certainly not going to be cheap by any means. And finally, I would like to discuss the PlayStation Network. Earlier this month, Sony finally announced that they were working on the ability to allow users to change the username that they've had for the PlayStation Network, which is definitely really good. And now there's been a small update which somewhat dampens the excitement. Several users who have managed to grab the 6.10 firmware for PlayStation have the ability to actually change their username, have reported the following message. Important information before changing your online ID. Not all games and applications for the PS4, PS3, PS Vita and other PlayStation systems support the online ID change. If you change your online ID, you may lose access to content including paid-for content that you have acquired, including content like add-ons and virtual currency. You may lose your progress within games, including saved data, leaderboards, and progress towards trophies. Part of your games and applications might not function properly. Both on and offline. And your previous online IDs may remain visible to you and other players for some places. Hopefully Sony do iron out these issues before the system finally goes live, because if so, I can't imagine anyone spending $10 or $5 if you're a PlayStation Plus member in actually doing this, because imagine you change your name and now suddenly you not only lose or risk losing the progress in your games, but you could also lose paid for content as well. So in theory, games could quite literally be, well, useless in your digital library, which would absolutely suck, particularly if you've got a pretty big digital library or DLC or whatever else you've bought, and that's not even including things like in-game currency that you've earned. It seems to me like this is a pretty big make or break type of thing, so hopefully Sony can fix this. Anyway, with all of that said, hopefully you have enjoyed the video. Normal stuff, like, share, comment, and subscribe. And, well, you could find us linked on Patreon in the video description, along with an Amazon affiliate link if you do decide to even buy a toaster. Of course, it does provide us a few pennies, but don't feel you have to, just letting you know. With all of that said, take care of yourselves. Bye for now.